Hey Dave, how are you?
Good, Fernando. How are you doing?
Good. Something weird has happened. This has happened twice where the SDWG meeting disappears from my calendar, only on my computer, so it's still on my phone, but it disappeared like 10 minutes ago. So
Huh.
I go to the Zoom link and I don't see it, and
Ah.
it's happened twice. So I'm gonna have to look at into this. Probably some,
Hello.
who
Hey,
knows?
Rahat.
Hey Rod, how are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
Good. So I mean, right now my calendar on my computer, I don't have the meeting.
You
So
were able, did you forward yourself the Zoom link?
yeah, so I got my phone and it's still on my phone, so I just forwarded it to me.
Yeah,
So this has happened twice, and it happens like 5 minutes before the meetings, which is weird.
that is bizarre because I haven't had, and sometimes the problem is the Zoom link itself, not the actual fact that it's in my
Yeah,
calendar.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea, but anyway, we're here, which is the good news, right?
Maybe
And
it'll
this
be a
meeting
really
should be
fast meeting
fun.
if no one else shows up.
This
That
meeting
would
should be
happen.
fun.
Rahat, at some point, um, I want to have a more comprehensive meeting with you about some other things, particularly related to UMSES and its helping us understand our utilities and carbon measures within
Okay.
UMSES. Um, I just don't know when I can have that meeting, but the longer I don't have that meeting, the more you're not doing as much as we'd like you to. So I'm trying to make that a priority.
Also, I'm shifting from 10 hours to 20 in June,
Right.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
we
Yes.
talk sooner than later. I my schedule is more open now, except
Uh-huh.
for
Okay.
I'm starting field work, so just mornings are kind of like when I go out in the field, but I'm pretty flexible
Okay. Would
because
it
clusters work.
would you be disappointed if it was a non-traditional time?
I mean, as long as it's not like 3 a.m.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, no, it's not going to be. I do those with my partners and colleagues outside of the country, but I wouldn't do those. Yeah, I mean, if it was like in the evening or something like
Yeah,
that,
that's
or
fine.
yeah. And are you more of an evening person than a morning person? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Absolutely.
If you don't mind that, it just might it might free up some other opportunities.
Sounds good.
Thanks. I'm gonna go a little camera off because I just picked up my lunch. Is that okay, Fernando?
Sure, sure,
So I am here. I'm just
sure.
Hey Fernando, how are you?
Hey, Belay, how are you?
I am good. How's your new place treating you?
Um,
You're not new
I'd
anymore.
say I'd say great. I think we're getting
Good.
I think we're getting squeezed by the state and the feds, so that's the not so fun part.
Yeah,
But it's probably happening to everybody. So
I know. Yeah, but good to see you
yeah,
and
likewise.
everyone.
Good to see everybody as you come in. Oh, so I can't share my screen. So I thought I set up the meeting. So yeah,
I think Dave has to give you permission.
for sharing screen.
Yeah,
yes,
I'm
I
sorry.
don't have that option.
Sure, sure, sure. Sorry. Um, so I know I need to give it to Tim as well.
right.
Yeah, you just give everybody.
I know I'm looking at.
Pretty much. Well, maybe except Bill, but
Well, I was going to say except Russ. He always gives us too much data. It's always bad news. Russ is always giving us bad data, bad news data, good data, bad news.
Well, just the easiest for me to do it right now is to make Tim and
Co-host.
Fernando co-hosts. If anyone needs co-hosting, let me know. And my camera's off partly because I'm eating a pizza, and that's not fun for anyone else to have to watch. So
You should have sent us via email our share, Dave.
I know. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have even said the word pizza. Now everyone's going to get pizza tonight. Right? That's what happens to me. Once that word is planted, it doesn't get out of my head until I eat it.
Me too.
So it's 1:01, Fernando.
Yep.
And people are still coming on. You might want to give it another minute, but then we could probably get started.
Absolutely. I just want to share the kind of the agenda briefly and then go from there. So let me put that here. Well, I hope everybody's doing well. It's good to see you. I hope you're having a good week. And if you had a so-so week, the good news is that I think this meeting will make you pick up a happy meeting to end the week. So, so let's see, where is my
Fernando, end of semester in College Park. So if you ask students, they are stressed because this week is their exam week.
right.
Right.
I have to go.
Yeah, so I just wanted to go briefly through the agenda, so I guess we're in the welcoming stage now, and depending on who's participating, we may not need introductions, but we can do that too. Then we'll have an interesting presentation on building climate resilient states, and specifically around the HydroNet network. And Tim Canty, my dear colleague from my old department in College Park, will give that presentation, and roughly 20 minutes with some discussion. Then I want to have a conversation around our work plan for 2025. And I'm a sucker for planning, and the experience that I had last year, granted that I joined mid-year, so I was not here for the full year, was that we were rushing and doing a lot of things at the end, right? You got to do the annual report, the update on the science and the recommendations, and I want to kind of take a breather and have a little bit of more room to discuss the deliverables that we have as a group. And I wanted to share some pieces of information that have been shared with the commission lately that I think can frame a little bit of our role in delivering our products for 2025. So and so we'll have maybe a half-hour conversation there, and then we can move on with other items. Does that sound like a good plan? Right. So let's see, our introductions needed. I am thinking that we have the usual suspects participating. So let's skip on that. However, when anyone participates in the conversation, I'll ask them just to say their name and their affiliation so that we know who we're talking to, okay? So welcome, everybody. Excited to have you all on board. So, Tim, let me turn it over to you to talk about HydroNet. And I've been hearing bits and pieces. Is it Mesonet, HydroNet? Sorry if I'm missing the name. Um, and, um, and tell us a little bit about this. And I know it's receiving quite a bit of publicity lately. So really looking forward to this.
Great. Thanks, and thanks for this opportunity to present. With part of this project, we're doing a lot of outreach, and it seems like every time I talk to someone, they say, "Oh, you need to talk to so and so," and then I talk to so and so, and they said, "Oh, you need to talk to these people." Eventually, we'll have everything covered. I actually know about half of you. I was worried I wouldn't know anybody, and I like, wait, I know most of these people. But for those of you who don't know me, I am an associate professor in the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Science here at College Park, but I'm also the director of the MEES statewide Marine Estuary Environmental Sciences graduate program. And also work with MDE doing air quality. But today I'm not here to talk about any of those things. So I will see if I can work technology. And talk about this somewhat new initiative. And feel free to interrupt me at any time. I'm not, we don't have to talk for 20 minutes and then questions for 20 minutes, just jump in. So, yeah, I don't need to explain, I think, to this committee the importance of the Chesapeake Bay. The figure on the right is Crisfield, Maryland. And if you look off into the distance, you can see the Chesapeake Bay. And if you look more closely, you can see the Chesapeake Bay. I don't know how many people spend time down in Crisfield, but flood risk isn't a thing. It's not a risk. This is happening very frequently. Often we focus on Annapolis and Baltimore when it comes to flooding. But Crisfield is one of, if not the poorest county in the state. If you go to the Eastern Shore, it's about as far south as you can get before you get into Virginia. And we see a bright sunny day. There's no storm activity here. This is just a king tide flood. And most of Crisfield is just barely above sea level. And when we first started in this project, everyone said, "Oh, you need to get to Crisfield. You need to get to Crisfield." And I did not take these pictures, but we were there a few weeks ago, and the hospital is 2 feet above sea level. Like really, this is a very frequent risk and or frequent happening. And when we're talking to community members, they know when the floods start happening, and it can happen. They'll go to the supermarket, they'll have to leave their car at the supermarket and walk home or find a different route home. They have more flood days than snow days off of school. So a couple of years ago, several years ago, emergency management, state Department of Emergency Management funded the Mesonet, which is a network of really high quality weather stations all across the state. Each one will be, no more than, Russ, correct me if I'm wrong, like 15 miles apart. So we're getting this nice network of weather stations all across the state. And myself and Louis Uccellini started talking as a former director of the Weather Service who sits in our department, like, what else is going on? What other types of monitoring? So we started looking at the Bay and trying to look what was happening. There are monitors on the Bay, but there are a lot of data gaps. And with flooding being such of primary importance, we're trying to think of, are there ways we could help? So the University of Maryland, College Park, the president and provost started this Grand Challenges grant program. There are individual grants, departmental grants, and institutional grants. And the departments on the right, the Earth System Science Interdisciplinary Center, Fernando knows well, not a department, but kind of a center of earth science excellence here. Atmospheric oceanic science, geology, geographic sciences, which is in a different college here, and the MEES program. So essentially a lot of the earth sciences under one umbrella submitted this institutional grant proposal, and we were successful. We're one of 3 programs that were funded. And under that, we created what we're calling the Climate Resilience Network, and we've got a catchy logo down there at the bottom right. But the focus of our proposal was trying to basically get the scientists out of the office, out of the lab, and into the communities, and try to tackle some of the pressing needs, as we were calling it, science serving our citizens. And so under this, we were able to secure some funding to start the HydroNet. And this is a network of relatively low cost water level monitoring sensors. I'll show a picture in a second. With the goal, one, provide information to local emergency managers. These are near real time, so you can see the trend in water height and how quickly it's changing. And this kind of helps the emergency managers. They don't have to drive everywhere to see what's going on or call people up. They can just look at our stations. Obviously, wanting to track long-term water level changes across the region and assist with flood planning, adaptation, mitigation strategies. So that's one of our larger goals here. This is our current map. Oh, I need to update it a little bit. The blue tabs are currently operating sites. Yellow tabs are planned sites. We started this out with a pilot project in Annapolis because to try to support the Downtown City Docks initiative to make that area more flood resilient. And we've been working with the Office of Sustainability and Emergency Management in Annapolis and Charles counties. Also, the Naval Academy, they're spending like $30 million on flood resiliency strategies as well. So that was a good first target, and we put in a cluster of stations there. Just because it was easier, we're focusing on the Western Shore, and that's ongoing. We haven't stopped, but now we're putting more emphasis on the Eastern Shore, and we're starting at Crisfield and then kind of working our way up. And then phase 3, coastal bays, we've had a lot of people reaching out from Ocean City and also Delaware bays, but also more recently inland. We know there's a lot of inland flooding. Just look at Ellicott City, but even I live near Cheverly, and it doesn't take a massive storm to flood a portion of 50 right near Cheverly there. And these are good targets of opportunity to potentially put in these low-cost sensors to help people plan their routes home. So what do they look like? On the right is an example of one. It's about this size. It's about the size of a water bottle. If it looks to you like it's PVC tubing with a solar panel attached, you would be correct. That's essentially what it is. We are working with a company, Hohonu, out of Hawaii. It's an oceanographer, started designing these. It's a sonic sensor, so it just sends a sonic pulse, bounces back up. You know, the time of arrival, you can measure water level height. It's quasi real time. It's not instantaneous, but it's fairly quick. And that solar panel, it runs off of a 4G network, so it's essentially plug and play. We started working with them because of the ease of use. As I said, we mount it up there. Someone from Woods Hole Group comes out and basically with their surveying equipment tells us exactly latitude, longitude, altitude. And so we know exactly where it's located. You see that bar that it's attached to, that bracket can hold about 300 pounds. And so we over-engineered this with the hope that in the future we can hang other instruments off of it. It's hard to get permission to start drilling holes in piers, but once you're there, why not use it as a good opportunity to add more sensors? So you can see the cluster of 5 stations in Annapolis, and we work closely with the city of Annapolis to locate those stations. You can see the names of some of the locations that we're working with. These can sit by themselves, but we like to have relatively secure places or places where there's a lot of people around. We don't want people, getting their 22s out and using these as target practice. But also we want to make sure, there's no accidents. If a boat collides with that bracket, the bracket's going to win. It's pretty robust. So like we put one, if you go in the city docks, we put one of these in the Harbor Master's slip, and at the Maritime Museum, just where there's a lot of people around. So, and on the bottom there was the first sensor that we put in. As Russ knows, I'm a modeler, but now I get to go outside and use power tools, which is always a danger. But and we have kind of a running bet who's going to be the first person to drop the drill in the water. So we spend a lot of time hanging over the piers and drilling backwards towards ourselves. Haven't lost too much blood. But in the picture down there, two of our partners from Charles County were out there helping us. They helped us identify a location. This is near Cobb Island. And when we had a community engagement meeting 2 years ago, the Science Serving Communities meeting, people asked us one of the first questions, like, well, where do you want to put these? And I said, it's not up to me. You tell me where you need to put these. And they said, well, the bridge going into Cobb Island, the entrance floods, and before it floods, we need to put paramedics on the island in case something happens. And so if we had some way to monitor beforehand to help us with that planning, it would be ideal. And so we said, great, this is a perfect example of what we're trying to do. If you look at the picture on the bottom, Cobb Island is just to the left. We wanted to put it on the bridge itself, but there are a lot of permitting issues, and it's taken a year. So this was put in April 24th, 2024. Just now, we've gotten a permit to put one on the bridge. In the meantime, Charles County said, "Hey, there's a park right nearby. You could put it on the dock," and so that was the first sensor. And I'll actually let me stop share. I'm going to bring up the web page to show you what the data feed looks like. Okay, so I'll send you this link. This is a map I put together. I'm hiring one of our wonderful undergrads this summer to actually put up a nice dashboard. But if you click on the blue tab, it takes you to the Hohonu dashboard. This is the company's dashboard, and you can see, boom, what the data feed looks like here, and also the map. And you can scroll out, scroll in. You can see some of the flooding from a couple of days ago. So it was 1.5 feet or so above predicted. The blue is the tide prediction from NOAA. The purple are the data we're collecting, and you can download the data as well. This is mean low water. You can look at other variables and other datums as well if you want. So, and we're working with Hohonu to set up an alert system so emergency managers can sign up, and once it reaches the water level reaches a certain threshold, an alert can go to their phone. We are not in the business of putting out alerts, but that is that's for the professionals. We do want to support them. So as I said, you can go to this webpage and look at this is the Cobb Island feed, the Nanjemoy Educational Center, and just quite recently we put one into a couple in Crisfield. They have to run for a month to do some QA QC on the data. We also at this time put new survey points in as well because it was difficult trying to figure out exactly where in space these things are located. So that's our currently active web page. Go back to the presentation. Go planned sites in yellow here, and in green Smith Island. We went to Hart Miller Island recently. MDE, Joel Dreesen was kind enough to set that up, and there's some two really great locations at Hart Miller Island, and also the debarking point to go to Hart Miller Island in Essex seemed like good areas to target. But again, we're basing on community needs. So if you know of other places, please let me know and we'll put them on the list. Okay, so we had an unveiling last June 2024 in Annapolis. A lot of us got to wear suits in the nice warm weather, but this garnered a lot of attention both at the higher echelons of the university, but also at the state level. And after we had this event, we really quickly got inundated with requests, and so we're trying to meet these requests as best we can. But as I said, the goal of this is to really serve community needs. Here are some of the partners we have. Need to update this as well. And just to give you an example of who we're working with. And as part of this, we're not, one of our mottos is, we're really trying to work together, collaboration, not stepping on each other's toes. If we can add value to other people's observation sites, that's great. So we're just trying to hit these data deserts where there's communities in need and there's really nothing nearby. But if you can think of other areas where we could be helpful, please let us know. This is by no means a complete list of the folks we're working with. Now, how are we funded? So as I said, through the Grand Challenges program, we've had 3 years of support. Year 2 is just wrapped up. We're on our final year. The issue with the sensors we're currently using is releasing them, which means every time we put out a sensor that's $3,000 a year that I have to find forever. And things like this keep me up at night. Just funding my research group keeps me up at night, at much less this. And obviously with the current funding issues, this is a problem. However, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Association Coastal Ocean Observing System, some of you may be familiar with MARICUS, NOAA, National Ocean Service, IUCE, the Integrated Ocean Observing System. IUCE is divided up into regional locations. We're part of the Mid-Atlantic, which is Massachusetts to the Carolinas. And so they have committed 5 years of support. The first year of support arrived in December. We have bi-weekly meetings, and at today's meeting, so the executive director is Gerhard Kuska. He worked in the Bush administration. He's fairly well respected, from my understanding, on both sides of the aisle, and actually he was able to get several Republican representatives to walk over to the White House to say, monitoring flooding is really important for all the coastal states, and we really need to keep this support going. So there's obviously across the board concerns for funding and no guarantees what'll happen in the future, but they are somewhat positive, cautiously hopeful that they will get future years of funding, that they will support us. We've also submitted proposals to support this work. We had submitted to the EPA STAR program last year on coastal ecosystems climate resilience. It was supposed to get funded, and then 10 days ago was canceled. So that would have been $1.2 million to support the development of some of the highest resolution flood modeling possible using one of the best regional climate models, with the ability to run that along future climate scenarios, but also working with Chris Brown to try to determine the types of infrastructure best suited to combat that flooding. So that was a disappointment. We have an NSF proposal out. NSF, we all watch the news, so I'm not hopeful. Nonetheless, we're hoping that with support from MARICUS, we can keep this going at least 5 years more. We are looking at other companies to buy sensors. So there's sonic sensors, there's radar sensors. The Hohonu company, we can lease radar sensors for $4,500, but recently I was in touch with Campbell. They'll sell us radar sensors for $2,700. So it's kind of a no-brainer to purchase our own sensors. If I get 2 years out of them, I'm going to be saving money. It'll be a little bit more complicated accessing the data, but as I said, we've got some really bright students here that can help us with. There's 3,600 comp sci majors here. At least one of them should be able to help us with this, but we have some students in-house in our department that can help us. And that would only cost $20 a month for a 4G. Oh, it's $200 a year for a 4G data plan. So it's much more inexpensive to maintain the network as we expand. Just a case in point of some of the ways we've been able to help understand flooding. This is flooding caused by the remains of Hurricane Debby. This is Annapolis, and this was last August. Campus was closed. AccuWeather put out a tornado warning at the same day, though that they shouldn't have. Nonetheless, there was a lot of flooding going on. We can monitor the flooding, but how do we understand what's causing this? Is this a rain inundation event? Is this a wind-driven event? So I went to the Null School website, one of my favorite websites that you can download wind fields. And so that green circle up in the right is approximately Annapolis. These are the wind fields. You can see the center of the remains of Debbie and get a sense that these were onshore winds coming from the southeast, while the remains of Debbie moved to the northeast. So this is a little while later, on August 8th to 9th, and you can see the winds shifting a little bit. And then as it passes, the winds shift from southeast to southwest. So this is what the data looked like on that day. Remember, this is the flooding. This is what the data looked like. And so on the 8th, we could see how much the data were diverging from the tidecast. And so I reached out to a lot of our partners saying, are you watching the data feeds? Because, you know, when your low tide is higher than the previous high tide, roughly, you kind of get an understanding of you're heading into rough territory. And they said, oh yeah, we've been using this. We're monitoring what's going on. But we also want to understand what's driving this. So I downloaded from a WeatherBug site, nearby WeatherBug Earth Network site, wind speed and wind direction. So wind speed is in black and the water level height is at the bottom. And so when the winds were strong, 15 to 20 miles an hour from the east southeast, all that water was getting pushed into Annapolis. And I have a colleague from the business school who lives in Dorchester on the Choptank. And I said, Cliff, are you flooded out? He said, no, we're high and dry out here. So this was a wind-driven event. And you can see when the winds died down and shifted, all that water flushed back out again. And so this is like we're trying to add value to these data sets to provide an understanding of kind of the root causes of these events, but also the long-term trends. And as I've said to everybody, you know, one summer's worth of data isn't going to solve this problem. We can't turn our back on this. And so we really have to buckle in for the long haul. We need continuous monitoring forever. Just to make the analogy to air quality, the Clean Air Act kicked off decades of observations and modeling to lead to the significant improvements we've realized in air quality. It's going to take that exact same approach. We're trying to kind of blanket the area with these aren't NIST quality sensors. I understand that, but in this case, good enough is perfect. We're getting data where we don't have data. We are working to get our data feed back to Mericus. They have a much more comprehensive website where they map out data from gliders, from various models, HAB models, from VIMS. We're working on getting the data feed to the National Weather Service to help with their forecasting. But this is one part of the larger puzzle. We have the Mesonet across the state. We've got the HydroNet across the bay. Here on campus, we have a micronet of weather stations, but there are other stations we'd like to add other observations. The red dots here are the Mesonet stations that are currently active. But other things that are important, dissolved oxygen, pH, temperature, turbidity, water color. We can work with the PACE satellite team. You know, the land-water interface is always a challenge for satellites because when the footprint of the satellite spans the land-water interface, what are you really measuring there? And so we can provide some data that could help the PACE team. And I've had some contact with the NASA folks over there. Nitrogen, you know, if we can start measuring the precursors to HAB blooms, we can better constrain models, but provide more data for early warnings and maybe targets of opportunity, saying, hey, we're seeing these warning signs. Maybe we can put some boats in the water to see what's going on. Air quality, near and dear to some of us. If we can get some low-cost air quality sensors, purple air sensors for out there. Low-cost weather stations have built a weather station network on campus with, they're about $1,000 Davis Pro 2 stations. So if there's not a nearby Mesonet station, let's add our own weather stations to get more information. The larger picture here is going from all these different interwoven networks to the Maryland EnviroNet and really try to offer kind of more holistic view while partnering with other data gathering sites across the state. I know other people are measuring some of these variables. Johns Hopkins are building a couple of super sites with some arm stations. So as I said, we're not trying to elbow people out of the way. Collaboration, not confrontation. We really want to find ways we can add value. We can help people that don't have any any data nearby, add to other observations, but also really getting into our communities. We spent a lot of time this past year with meetings with people on Zoom, driving across the state. When we were in Crisfield, we had to meet with, we didn't have to, we wanted to meet, and we did meet with the mayor and town council. So we ended up getting interviewed by a Fox affiliate out of Delaware. And the next day I get a phone call from this guy from Delaware. He's like, are you Tim? Are you guys on the news? I'm like, yeah. He's like, you got to come out here. I got to show you all the flooding we're dealing with. Why are you letting people build in these areas? I'm like, dude, I don't have that kind of authority, but I'm happy to work with you. It's like, oh, we'll get in my Harley. I'll show you everything. I'm like, okay, Mike, I'll try to get out there this summer. So anyway, this is HydroNet. If you have ideas, any ways we can help support your activities, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You have ideas. Boy, it'd be great if you did this thing. This isn't about me writing research papers. This isn't about me giving a presentation at a conference, whatever. That'll happen. This is truly about helping our communities. And so your support and guidance, any way we can fit into your activities, add value and help our communities, please let me know. Great,
Tim. Thanks very much. I wanted to open up for questions. I know Jennifer's got one on the chat that I'll kind of compliment. I think in terms of making a system like this financially sustainable over time, right? Have you given some thought as to, I mean, you have some funding now for maybe another 5 years. Is that going to allow you to expand where you want to expand? Is that going to, what I'm trying to understand a little bit the financial model for this.
Well, right now the financial model is we're buying sensors and putting them out there, but we haven't in our budget longer term. I mean, the easy part is actually putting stations out. It's the maintenance that kills you, and that's why projects like this fail. Someone retires, the funding dries up, and you can't maintain the systems anymore. Maricus could only commit 5 years. They can only do 5-year chunks, and they operate out of Delaware, but their whole purpose is coastal ocean observing systems. So this is central to what they do. The hope is that, this becomes integrated so much into kind of everyone's daily use that we can't disconnect it, that, we may move sites around as we learn better the flooding issues and the better needs. Do we need 5 sensors in Annapolis? Maybe not, but it was a good first start. And honestly, it attracted a lot of attention at the state level, and that was one of the things we were trying to do as well. So we're aware of the issues associated with maintaining these long term. I mean, no one's going to give me 30 years of funding. That would be great. But 5-year chunks, and yeah, you will have bake sales if we need to. We'll sell sponsorship. I also am a faculty fellow in our business school here. I've had some communications with the insurance companies and mortgage companies, and we will have public-private partnerships. This station brought to you by Pepsi. We're a Pepsi campus here. I'm happy to do that. Really, as long as it allows us to maintain and expand the network, that's what we're trying to do.
Okay, yeah, and Jennifer in her comment brought up the subscription type model, which I think you alluded to as well.
Yeah, and they're looking at this with the Mesonet too. If a company wants to access the data and use that to benefit the company, I think it's a reasonable expectation that they will fund this. For research purposes, for public uses, we want to make it free to everybody. But if, Fortune 500 company wants to use this data, they should support it, especially with the lack of federal funding now. I think that is very reasonable, and we're keeping this in mind.
Great. Okay, so I have Don, then Bill, then Adele in that order. So Don?
Muted. You're muted, Don.
Don, you sound better when we can hear your voice.
I was looking at myself on the screen, and just by total coincidence, I look at my shirt, turn on the pumps.
Awesome.
But Tim, I'm trying to think this through about what value this is and how to sustain it as well. And it strikes me that first of all, we have a very long, high quality network of sea level monitors in Maryland. There are 8 in Maryland. They're on both sides of the bay. So the question is, why can't you use those and develop products from it? Or is it a case where you need a denser array of measurements? Do we know that? Is the scale of sea level variability on a small scale like that so great that we need separate sensors, or can we use the NOAA tide gauges, which have been maintained since turn of the last century, and deliver online products, or founded? They're not going to sink. They're well founded. They're tested and available. So why don't we use those? Do we need this finer network? I think in some places in Crisfield, you have a big gap of the coast where you don't have tide gauges, but in others, can you just rely on Annapolis, for example? It's got a historic tide gauge there.
Sure. Well, if you talk to the communities, they want dozens of these in their communities. They want to know exactly what road, exactly what little stream, river, whatever is flooding. And the tide, they've told us that the tide gauges aren't good enough. They're not accurate enough for their communities. And so, yeah, we're not going to replace those. Those are completely different, robust beasts. These are cheap sensors. So, and for Annapolis, some of those areas in Annapolis, the emergency roads, when they're flooding, one of them, I forgot which one, floods before the other one. And so having these hyperlocal monitors can really help with emergency management and planning. For Crisfield, they had one of these BRIC grants, and they had $37 million to build seawalls and green infrastructure, marsh grasses to mitigate some of the tidal flooding. And we were working to support that, to help them identify placement of these structures. They lost the BRIC grant. Right. So they were really looking to move forward, and we just met with them yesterday. So right now we're just helping them monitor where the flooding is becoming most severe. So I agree, and this was the first question we asked. Well, we've got the tide gauges there. Do we need more? And our community said yes.
Well, one of the interesting things is that we have a guy who's the NOAA expert on this, Billy Sweet, who lives in Maryland, lives outside of Annapolis.
Right.
And he can tell you, for example, in his community in Epping Forest, he can say when that levels up on a certain part in the beach, he can tell you what the tide gauge in Annapolis is. So the question is, can you just use that and promulgate that information to local users, reference to things that they care about, as opposed to putting additional measurements in? It's a question I think needs to be looked at.
No, I agree 100%. Some things we didn't think of. I talked to some folks at the Coast Guard, and they were talking about bridges. And I said, yeah, this is a concern as water level rises, getting over the bridges. And they said, no, getting under the bridges, the air gap. And so not just the Bay Bridge, but all these little marinas, monitoring the air gap. Are you going to have to unmast? Are you going to have to red light, green light as water level rises for individual bridges? And so that's more at a community level that we can help out. We're hoping to.
So,
thank you, Tim.
Sorry, Tim, let me make sure I understand this. The problem is not that the NOAA tide gauges don't work or are difficult to query. They're just not enough.
They're not enough. Some of them aren't close enough to some of these communities. Or with the river flooding, is it flooding from an upstream event, flushing down? And so we can put monitors along the rivers and monitor the flooding as it's occurring, or is it a wind-driven event? So we're adding some data where we don't have anything. Yeah.
Let's move to Bill. Go ahead, Bill.
All right. Well, Don stole my big question of connecting with, and I presume at some point you can do some comparison between the NOAA sites. But one of the things that made me think about was at Chesapeake Biological Lab, where they've got sensors out on their pier, they've got a line in which the main road in by the tiki bar, when it floods, and so that's their threshold.
I've talked to Karis about this.
Can I drive home?
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I thought as that example, like at Cobb Island or these other sites, if you had these have these thresholds, at which point do you get these flooding events?
And Maracus will fund us to put cameras in too. So they have a camera network as well. And this is where at the very hyper local level, you want to know that one road, and you don't have to get up at 3 a.m, drive anywhere. If you could just go on your phone and say, oh, I got another hour before it floods, that's something additionally we're going to hope to add to, not everywhere, but a lot of places.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Yep.
Adele?
Yes, thank you, Tim. Good presentation. Hey, I was looking at the graph that you showed, the gap between observed and NOAA's sort of prediction. So as a modeler, and also based on questions that or issues or points that Don and Bill raised, we can't really put instrumentation everywhere, as you know. It's just it can be. Okay, it's just around Annapolis, that's one thing, but if we want to really get good picture of the entire sort of Chesapeake Bay and all that. So that's where the models come to rescue. And I don't know if those data that you were showing, it was from what sort of data, was that the sea level viewer of NOAA or so on and so forth. The question I have is really, and maybe your data can even help, is that how well the model that or NOAA's sea level viewer is being calibrated and validated that to actually do a little bit better predictions. So therefore, if it can actually timely on-time predictions with all these mesonets and all that, then really we don't need to have all this expensive monitoring all over. Again, maybe your data can even sort of help in that model validation, calibration, and so on. That was really what caught my eye.
Yeah. So the company Hohonu that builds the sensors, they have their own model and they incorporate the data from their sensors into the model. It's still not perfect, but our hope is that we provide additional data points and that at some point these can be fed back into the models. I'm a modeler, so yeah. Can we improve the models with more data? If I could put out 150 sensors or more across the bay, we could, that just screams machine learning to me at some level. I'm not a machine learning expert, but I have colleagues who are, and also feeding the data back to like the mycoastapp.org. Thanks, Jennifer. Right now we're working on building out a network. The next step is building our own dashboard, but our communities want different things. Some have their own websites and they just want the data feed. Other communities don't have anything. And so our next step, which is a little bit more complicated, is try to figure out how to get the data in the hands of the people as soon as possible. That includes the forecasters. And so working with the National Weather Service, and they have a whole mechanism for ingesting data. But now that we're going to add from different companies, we have to pull it all together and create one kind of unified data stream. And Maracus does this. They take all of these data feeds and convert them into NetCDF files, for those of you who dig into these things, and put all of them on their dashboard. But they'll give that data back to us in a nice, easy, well, for me, easy to use format. So this is also, well, so this is one of the problems. There's a lot of data out there from a lot of different sources. It's not always easy to find. And it's not until you actually click on some of the data sets, oh, they haven't been collecting data since 2021. So-and-so moved away, or they lost a grant or whatever. And talking to MDE and DNR and other entities, we find, and I've said this publicly before, so I'll say it again, sometimes different state agencies don't always communicate as well as we think they might be. I'm not trying to offend anybody. We see the same thing in departments at the university, so we can be just as guilty, right? So I think there's also an opportunity here to, Hopkins is doing stuff, CERC is doing stuff, UMC's, are there some other ways we can try to coordinate so we're not duplicating resources? We can figure out where we can be most effective. If I can put one of these sensors by the Tiki Bar over by the Chesapeake Biological Lab, then people know when last call is and they got to get in their cars to leave. Something like, this is really what we're trying to do. But as we've talked to a lot of people, realize there's a lot of great work going on, but the communities aren't getting it. As much as we love to say how awesome we are and how much we're helping people, when you go and talk to them, like, we were completely unaware of this. I'm just relaying what we hear from our communities. And that's something I think as our community, we really need to try to solve this problem. And it's not easy. I'm not trying to trivialize it. How to meet the needs of our communities in a way not that we can use, that they can use. I can visualize the crap out of this data, and it's great for me to give a scientific talk, but it's not necessarily good enough for this crabber or this homeowner living on the shore, this retiree. And we've got to solve this problem. We have to solve this problem. And I'm agnostic here. I have no ego in this. I just want to do good work. That's all I'm trying to do. So if you got ideas or can connect me to other people, don't hesitate to scream at me. Tim, you got to do this thing, and we'll do the best we can. So, and earlier, so I work with mortgage companies and insurance companies, and I have never once gotten pushback on climate change. Never once. In fact, you know who the people really selling their oceanfront homes are? CEOs of mortgage companies. They know what's happening. And if you think they're not looking at Maryland, I got a bridge to sell you. They are really looking closely at Maryland. And so this is a concern. And the insurance companies, the insurance companies recognize they can't just leave all of the states, then they won't have a company. So they're talking about different ways to approach insurance, different products, insurance products, but this is happening, and the private sector knows it's happening. As I said, they have never once pushed back on me and saying, "Oh, this is all a hoax." What they're saying is, "Okay, what do we need to do? I can't jeopardize the company, but what should we do?" Anyway.
Good point. Belay has a question on the chat, I guess about Belay, can you cost per site, that sort of thing? Can you frame it?
I can frame it. I think part of it Don already asked. You said I want to blanket the Chesapeake, and I would love to see how much is enough, how many sites, because you have to be able to predict a little bit from the model side, and there's comparison to what Don mentioned. And I think in terms of suggestion, you could do what the New York Mesonet or others do. You can see if you can do a data deal with National Weather Service. Those are, but good work. Look forward.
Yeah. How much is enough, or is it too much? This is one thing we're trying to work on. Our communities will come to us and say, "We need 15 sensors." Like, I don't really know if you need 15 sensors, but show us where your trouble spots are, and we'll figure out how best we can help there. And of course, we're always resource limited as well. And so maybe 100 sensors are enough for our communities. We're kind of figuring this out as we go. And maybe that's distasteful for some people. Fine. I mean, that's okay, but we're still moving forward in this. We're doing this. And we want to work with partners to make this as useful as possible to our communities.
Yeah, no, I'm just a suggestion, the scientific persuasion aspects of it on the sort of the ballpark numbers. And I've used a lot of the Weather Bank Earth Network data met sensors. Some of them are not worth looking at, so you have to be careful on what you. But I am much more of a network data person. So thank you.
Yeah. No, I work routinely with large air quality data sets, so I'm not naive to some of these issues. as I said, you know, if you're just going back to those pictures of Crisfield, this is only going to get more prevalent,
Yep.
not just in Crisfield.
So Tim, I was curious. I mean, you mentioned the kind of community aspect or the gap with the community aspect of this work. You know, there's all these data streams out there, all these websites, and but you know, not necessarily being fully appreciated by the community. You know, is there a community engagement component included in the work that you're doing, and or if not, how have you thought about bridging that gap?
Yeah, we actually have Under the Grand Challenge is a very active program. We've had several meetings on campus. The last one was in January. It was after a big snowstorm, but nonetheless, we still had about 150 people show up, us participate in this. And this was just all community members. We had people from Crisfield and all around the Bay areas, and that was just one component of it. And so we've put a lot of time and effort into traveling around the state or setting up meetings with people out of this around the state. Emergency management at the county level, at the state level. I've had some communications with state representatives. We've had some communications with our federal delegation as well. So yeah, we're really trying to integrate the community portion of this into what we do, that they're helping to drive our decisions. That has to be a focal point of our efforts. Otherwise, no one's going to know about it and no one's going to care. We also have a teaching innovation specialist working with us, and so she's using these data feeds and trying to make she was a 8th grade science teacher before she joined us, so she's working with our teaching communities to try to find ways to integrate not just this but other data sets into kind of the day-to-day science curriculum at our schools across the state. So, and we've had internships and brought in high school students to work on these internships. So we're really trying to be conscientious of not neglecting that a very vital component of this effort.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you said you're in year 2, so you're really getting started. I mean, in a way, right?
Well, yeah, we're at the end of year 2 right now. If I'm just going to put some stuff in the link. So we have to, in University of Maryland, made it clear that the Grand Challenges program is not going to continue. So we have to make sure we transition off the university funding into Maricus funding. I just put a link to the Maricus Oceans map. They are kind of a clearinghouse for all of this data, including the USGS buoys and the models, and you know, they're in this region. It's a nice website. It's a little slow at times, but they are bringing up all of the data and models for this area. So if you weren't familiar with it, I encourage you to have a look. So,
great.
yep.
Well, I think we've exhausted the conversation on this, but Tim, thanks very much. This was very useful for those of us who couldn't tell HydroNet from Mesonet from other nets. I think this was particularly educational.
I wanted to call it Aquanet, but that had too many bad connotations from the 1980s. So I think it's trademarked as well. But I put my email address in there. Feel free to reach out, yell at me.
Tim, I was just going to say, you know, this is also, there is a public portion of this meeting. You're more than welcome to stay if you wanted to.
Right.
I would like to
join us at future meetings.
Yeah, no, I would really like to, but we have a visiting faculty candidate here, and I'm scheduled to meet with him at 2:00. So I do have to jump. But I really appreciate this opportunity, and I really appreciate any thoughts, ideas, criticisms. Please just lay it on me.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks very much. I hope
everybody.
the rest of your day goes great.
Me too.
So,
See you at graduation.
Yes,
Thanks, Tim.
yeah, looking
Bye-bye.
forward to it. See you.
Hey, Fernando,
Yes.
now you made me think. Has this group had a briefing on the Mesonet and MIMA?
Not during my tenure, so which is what, 10 months now?
And
You know,
not during my tenure, so it's
Yeah, I don't recall one.
Okay, Would you like me to schedule 10 minutes on the Mesonet,
Yeah,
which is
that'd be great.
supported by,
Yeah, I think we can probably put that on the agenda for the June meeting, if that's
yeah,
okay.
well,
I mean,
whenever you
you know,
want.
or whenever it's convenient, but we could do this at the June meeting.
Yeah, it's complimentary, and it's funded by the Maryland Emergency Management people for for things like just what happened out west.
Great. Yeah, so maybe we can move on to our next topic, which is really more to talk about the work that we need to do as a group for 2025, and you know, the end product being our contribution to the MCCC annual report, including recommendations and the science update. And a question that I'll be asking in every session that we have, right? For instance, like today we talked about this HydroNet, and then I'm thinking, could this be a topic that we can build on to submit a recommendation towards the end? And I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a lot of activity going on. Certainly, we have 8 working groups as a commission, and you know, meetings like this are happening all the time. So there's lots of ideas going on, and you know, we are the Science and Technology Working Group. So you know, I think our role is to try to highlight, you know, the science, update the science, but also try to be a little bit more what's the word I'm looking for? Looking into the future, right? And there have been a couple of developments recently in you know, and I have the privilege of sitting, you know, of course, in the commission, but also in the commission steering group. So there's some conversations that are had, like, you know, where is this going? How can we make the process better, right? And particularly, you know, my almost last year as observing the dynamics of the group's discussions in the commission and in this group, you know, I'm trying to think, so how do we start, and I brought a little bit of this before, you know, how do we start thinking about this kind of a multi-year format, right? And try to be a little bit more, you know, have a little bit more foresight. That's the word I'm looking for, foresight. So let me share some things that have been discussed recently in the commission, and just give you some examples, and maybe we can have a little bit of a conversation of how the rest of 2025 looks like for us. So let me share this. So, and I shared these attachments, but the Office of the Comptroller of Maryland recently issued essentially climate change costs for Maryland, a report which I shared, right? It's here on your screen. And you know, I think it's a very interesting read, right? Looking through it's got an interesting narrative, not a whole lot of cost data. There are some interesting things, you know, climate projections, and you know, I'll let you go through it. In terms of the cost of climate change, there are some gross estimates that have been estimated there, and some cost of inactions, and potentially several caveats to the cost estimates, right? So I'm not going to go through this in a whole lot of detail. I'll let you read it. But the reason I bring it up, and I'm going to pull another report that, let me see if I can do this right. So there was another presentation that was done actually by one of our colleagues at University of Maryland College Park, which had to do with interestingly with federal policy changes, which is a topic that is occupying many of our minds, you know, over the past few months. Federal policy changes and the role of potential subnational actors like states on climate change. And there's some interesting analysis here. And this is essentially the Center for Global Sustainability that's directed by Nate Haltman. You know, some of us are fairly familiar with the analytical tools that they use. But what's interesting about this work, of course, is that they do look into making these projections, midterm, 2035, 2050, right? The tools that they use in this case, the Global Change Analysis Model, GCAM, and other kind of tools. This is the kind of tools that may be helpful in bringing together all these policy changes, all these technologies and infrastructure changes into a common framework that is prospective, so allows to have that foresight, and that also translates these findings into economic indicators. Like what investments need to be made, when, how much are going to be these investments, and models all have their uncertainties, and there's lots of things, but there's something to say about being more prospective. And this is the type of tool that we have in state to do this type of analysis, right? The reason I wanted to bring this one up is because I think as we think about our recommendations, and one of the common comment across recommendation areas that happened last year was, well, if we're going to make a recommendation that's going to commit some funding, there was a little bit of a hesitation there. I also get the sense from looking at these documents, and I'll let you look at them, so we can have a conversation, is that, it's like what Tim was presenting here. Everybody's like measuring their own thing, or everybody's making their own estimates. The comptroller, it's cool that they do this, but it's hard to tell whether these things are somewhat coherent. And, our job as a group also is to try to provide, that level of analysis, or that level of criticism, if I can say that word. So anyway, so that's something else that's out there. Let me pause there, see if there are any comments before I move on. Yes, Jennifer, please.
So Mike Hinson is supposed to be pulling together all these different resources from all the different stakeholders. I mean, he has a tiny office, tiny staff, but I think they're doing an extraordinary job. So I put in the chat some of the resources that they're putting together, because we just are, recreating the wheel through so many different agencies in so many different ways and not pulling it together. I also put in the chat that he's asking different districts and different leaders, such as all of you, to put some anticipated needs and sort of challenges into a survey that he has, that I also put into the chat.
Right.
Very few people have filled this out. And we just heard about, the issue with the Chesapeake, but the fact is that the really expensive flooding we've had so far has been the rain. It's been Ellicott City and what just happened this week, which are not on the Chesapeake or on the beach. So, we're going to have to figure out how to achieve all of this for the whole state.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, and that's and a little bit of the idea is to kind of how do we bring all these pieces together coherently, right? And that's to me, it's something that's been floating in my brain since I started, being back in this group. And I think we may have a potential strong role in that, because we are the S&T working group, right? And a lot of this is, it's about putting together the science and putting together in a way that it makes sense for the policymakers, for the decision makers, for our legislators, for our executive agents, right? So that's it's a little bit of something that's been on my mind, and I wanted to share it. But let me put this now in the context of what we actually need to do as a group, which is our recommendations and our our contribution to the annual report. So let me see if I have these teed up properly. So the recommendations process, right? And that's here. So here are some of the dates that are relevant, right? For our working groups, the deadline to submit a our Google form, right? The recommendations in the updated format is September 1st, right? September 1st, in dog years is around the corner, right? And I think, you know, again, based on my experience last year, we sort of started talking about the recommendations, putting them together. It was doing September 1st. We were doing this in July and August, right? So it was, you know, done rather quickly. So I want to start kind of doing this with a little bit more lead time. As we hear presentations and as we explore what to prioritize in our recommendations, for example, today's presentation by Tim could lead hypothetically to a recommendation by us that, you know, the commission focuses on monitoring this, and that, right? Or not, right? It could not fall under our 3 or 4 priorities, right? So I want to start getting us to think in advance. So one question I'll ask every time we make one of these presentations is to us, we'll have a little bit of discussion whether we think that this could be a priority area for our recommendations. The other thing is that the format changed, right? And you've probably seen this already, you know, why adjusting it, but let me give you the meat of it. It's there's a Google form, right, that you can find and we will be able to find this in the slides. There's a limit of 4 recommendations per working group, right? And last year we did 4, so that's okay. And but the other thing is that the text of the recommendations needs to be more compact. Any complementary information, supplementary information, you know, will go in an appendix or something to that sort. And what the commission is actually looking for here is to make us working groups, as they should, you know, think harder and more succinctly about, you know, posting these recommendations. So I want to kind of get everybody thinking, you know, in that direction.
Fernando, can I just add one?
Please.
One other point to that. The other reason to get these recommendations in earlier is for coordination between working groups.
Correct.
Because that was one of the things that's often seen, is that a lot of recommendations, there might be 3 different working groups that are working on a similar recommendation. They're all slightly different, but how could they be put together to be, as you said earlier, more coherent and really move the ball forward? Thank you.
Yeah. The analogy that I made, you know, tongue in cheek, after looking at the 2024 annual report recommendations, that it looked like a Chinese restaurant menu. You know, everything's in it, right? And everything's delicious, right? Everything's delicious, everything's worth eating, but you're not going to be able to order it all, right? So that's a little bit of the process that we need to start thinking is how do these recommendations that we make, how do they fit coherently into an overall package, right? So which means that we'll probably will be able to see recommendations submitted by other groups and try to cross-pollinate. So and then the other piece, of course, is and let me tee up that other which is the actual annual report, which this is the 2024, right? The key thing here for us, in addition to the recommendations, is a science update, right? Which starts somewhere here. And you know, it is a fairly short. Oops, I think I missed it. But anyway, I think here it is. Update on the science. It is a fairly short update. You know, it looks in the document itself is like 4 or 5 pages, but when you type it up in a Word document, it's actually like a couple of pages. So it's not terribly long. So I will also want to start getting us thinking ahead as to what updates we want to make there, and those don't necessarily need to dissociate from the recommendations, because our recommendations are going to be our priorities, right? So the updates should actually reflect those priorities in a way, right? So I want to start thinking ahead of that. So that's sort of what I wanted to cover in this update. So I wanted to kind of get a conversation going, and any thoughts are appreciated. And Jennifer, I see your hand up. I don't know if it's the same from before or not. Probably same from before.
No, sorry, it was from before.
Okay, that's quite all right. That's quite all right. So,
Thank you, Fernando. I think you've reminded us of who our audience is. These are elected officials. They have a short attention span. Don, who I hope is still on, has always been remarkably successful at getting the attention of elected officials. So we need to think about how we phrase the message as much as we need to think about what the message should be. And right, keep them short and pithy. And remember that funding is going to be tight.
yes, thank you, Ross. Eric.
Yeah, so the Department of Commerce and the governor recently came out with an assessment of where they should be making investments to advance the economy of the state of Maryland. They called them lighthouse sectors, and they were AI, and they were bio, and they were quantum. Nowhere in there was energy and climate.
Yep.
We have very, very leading requirements for reducing climate impacts. And if we're going to be consistent with our goals for addressing the Climate Solutions Now Act and the governor's call for reducing CO2 emissions, then shouldn't that sector of the economy also be one of the lighthouse sectors?
Yes, and I'll of course I'll ask you if you have some time to share that document, if you have it handy, so that we can take a look at it. And
I'm happy to send it to you right now.
And this is the sort of thing that I was trying to refer to, right? Because the state has a tremendous budget deficit that's going to be multi-year. There's going to be some hard decisions, tough choices to be made, and it is in our best interest. It's also in the best interest of the state to keep the eye on the ball of climate change and the needed investments that need to be made. But in order to make those cases, we need to come up with a very solid analysis that is defensible and that makes the case a priority. So I wanted to kind of put that in front of us in terms of the impact that our work can have and that our work needs to have. I have Jennifer and then Suzanne.
Yes, this legislative cycle, they passed new bills to do some very important major studies. One on the fiscal cost of climate that the Comptroller's Office is sort of lead on, one on a holistic energy strategy, and a third on data centers. And within that, there's a big interest in nuclear. So the group of people on this call, I'm hoping you guys are in touch with the people working on those studies if you have a relevant piece to add to it. But I do want to really build on something that someone said earlier in terms of whatever is recommended should be very clear and for the politicians, to follow up on. But last year and the previous year, we had very important recommendations from the Climate Commission around public education on climate issues, and no legislator introduced a bill on those recommendations. And so I think that as this group is working on thinking about what do we want to suggest, we should be thinking of what committee would it go to, and is there a delegate and a state senator that may want to take this on? Should we involve them in this conversation now as we're developing those recommendations? Because we don't want this to be analysis paralysis. We'd like for these things to be implemented.
Yes, indeed. Suzanne?
Yeah, sorry, I'm in transit and just reacting to the lighthouse comments. I want to just emphasize that the lighthouse areas are the governor's focus on economic growth and development. And I just left a meeting with members of the governor's office, and they emphasize, both the deficit and yet their commitment to two really big policy leadership opportunities. One, the blueprint, and two, the Climate Solutions Now Act. So I think it's really important that, understand the use of the Lighthouse document and that plan, but that does not preclude the commitment to climate, and the opportunity of the Climate Commission and the working groups is to really emphasize and communicate the value, the economic value, and the growth potential of investing in climate solutions, investing in the green economy, in science and monitoring to support outcomes. So I just want to emphasize that I think this governor remains steadfast in his commitment to climate change policy, and is experiencing a historic deficit and historic headwinds from the federal government. So how can you make it easy for this governor to move forward? Because he absolutely wants to.
Exactly. And I think you hit the nail in the head with that last question, right? So how do we need to make the case easy, right? To be incorporated in decisions, and so let's think in that direction, okay? That's our recommendations have to be built in that direction, and our update on the science also has to be built in that direction, because that's the meat of scientific meat of that report. So
well, I agree with your comments, Susan. The fact is, if you look at the report, page 47, which has the statistics for clean tech, which is where the climate would be, it ranks just as highly as the sectors that were selected. So I understand he has a commitment to climate. I don't downplay that in any way. But when I look at the data and the opportunity for the state of Maryland in economic benefit, I just think that they're missing the boat by not making clean tech or climate tech, or whatever you want to call it, one of the lighthouse sectors. That's my only comment.
So let's stick with it. Let's make our case, right? Let's make sure that we don't that we're in the top of that discussion, right? So not in the layers below, but in the very top. So that's I just wanted to kind of and really thankful for all these comments and discussion. So we'll continue this conversation in subsequent meetings, but certainly building up to our recommendations and the science update. I think we can move to the next item on the agenda, which is other items, which I think I think we're kind of there. So, but if there's anything else that we want to discuss that anyone wants to bring up, and if not, we can move to the public comments portion of the meeting. Are there any public comments?
Brandon, you may want to stop sharing your screen as well.
Oh, yes, let me do that. So yes, let me do that. So yeah, for some reason my stop share button disappeared. Oh, here it is. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you.
And I don't see anyone raising their hand, or oh, there we go. Jeff's there.
Hey everyone. I know I sound better when I'm on mute, but anyway, listen, thank you very much for your effort. I know it's very difficult. I wish more of the public was participating. And we all run the risk of alienating ourselves from family and friends and so on and so forth if we bring up the issue of climate. I guess perhaps by getting through to our elected officials, say for example, when Tim Canty was being confronted or asked by the finance specialist in mortgage and also insurance, he should have turned around and asked, well, what is your industry doing to finance all these fossil fuel projects? And basically, I know that would probably rub people the wrong way, but I understand that scientists are confronting ever more dire predictions. And you folks have to keep to a consensus. And I admire your ability to be calm, like test pilots are in a aircraft that's failing. So you possibly should bring up the fact that there are members of our community, namely your scientific community, that are predicting dire results, such as famines, and or crop failures, massive crop failures, and massive climate refugee migrations. And say these, now right now they're the fringe, but if they become the consensus, then you need time to do something about it now. And you have to work double your efforts, no, triple them on mitigation. So, like I said, thank you very much for your service to the public. And I realize that I'm talking to people who are very accomplished in the rigors of high achievement academics, and I appreciate your efforts. Carry on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Silla, for that great reflection. And I'll pick up on a couple of points that you mentioned. And this is why I am so keen on trying to get into an analysis place that allows us to have more foresight, because then it gives us the time that Mr. Silla was referring to, right? If there are going to be droughts, famines, whatever phenomena predicted into the future, let's try to get a sense of how long that's going to take, and also what investments need to be made and when, so that mitigate those effects, etc. So I think we can have a conversation, or what will be a consistent framework to put all these policies in different sectors, in the energy and the power and quantum and whatever's in the in this report that Eric shared with us. How are all these things going to add together, and how is that going to change over time? And that foresight capability is something that I would like to see more of our emphasis in our contribution to the report. So I want to leave you with that reflection for us to think about, and we will reconvene on, I think it's June 27th. So we're going to have a little bit of the May meeting. We front loaded it because we have Memorial Day and graduations and a bunch of other commitments lined up. So we know that happens. Before closing the meeting, I want to see if anyone has anything to add, anything to contribute.
Fernando, may I just, something is sort of coming as a question to me, and I really, to some extent, I sort of understand complications, but where does the Maryland Climate Commission, how does that help to connect the issues, for example, that we have in Maryland, Chesapeake Bay region, whatever, to federal? In other words, is that our sort of legislators, congressmen and senators that are taking that message? Is Climate Commission in sort of close communication with them? In other words, or is it just sort of we are relying on the state of Maryland's own budget, on governors and state legislators, which is one aspect of it. So I'm just sort of puzzled that how can we play, hey, these sort of emergencies are in sort of, as you mentioned, that maybe in the prospect, I hope not, but so what can the federal government, before flooding, before all the disasters, can put in order to basically have, whether it is sensory or whatever data, accumulation and so on, data collection. So anyway, those are puzzling me. In other words, I don't know the mechanism that where climate emissions report, besides being public, how does that connect to federal?
Yeah, and I don't know that I have an answer for you, but it's definitely a good topic for conversation. I see that Jennifer raised her hand, so I'm gonna.
Yeah, Jennifer, maybe someone.
Don was first.
Oh, no, well, just to follow on, I'm just, not that I can answer Adele's question, but seeing my friend Adele reminded me, he raised at the controller's announcement for the study that you talked about, he raised an issue which we put in our report back in 2008, which I think I've forgotten about, but is really important that it's not getting much attention. And this is water supply, particularly the abstraction of groundwater. That's already, there's over abstraction of the groundwater already, and that's going to be exacerbated by demands for irrigation and so on. And so I just want to make sure it's on the list of things that we might need to want to return to and have be informed about, because I think that's something that takes time to prepare for, but it could come and bite us.
There you go.
That's all I have.
Don, thank you for bringing that up. And we are doing some water reuse incorporation research and stuff that I think really that will be a good topic. Thank you.
So Adele, in answer to your question about the commission, my understanding is the commission is really only focused on state policy, not even county policy, really, just the state policy. But I will say that it's very hard to know what to do on state policy when the federal policy is changing so quickly and we don't really understand it. Additionally, the governor has not yet signed this upcoming year's state budget. And my understanding is they're still looking for another $15 million in cuts, and that we might come back again in September for even more cuts because of the situation. So one thing that I'm hoping to see is for there to be some sort of agency series of presentations where the different agencies present, listen, this is what's different in our purview right now based on the cuts of the federal government, the loss of federal science staff and the loss of grants, both, and the loss of regulations, because you've got this multi-level difference in terms of the situation than we had even a year ago. And then we had cuts within our own state government. It would be very helpful to understand the differences that MDE and the other agencies are experiencing right now as they're trying to achieve our climate solution now goals with so many fewer resources and with of course the speed of climate change becoming faster.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, no, thank you all. And I do note Jared's comment in the chat that the audience for the MCCC report is the governor's office and the General Assembly. So presumably they're reading it. If they are reading it, let's assume that, then let's provide a compelling narrative. It's up to us. So, well, folks, with that, we have a minute or so to go. I thank you again for a very interesting meeting. And as I promised from when we started the meeting, this was going to make your week. So I think we delivered. So thank you all, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Good job. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.